How's it going? Today I wanted to dive into using compressors specifically on a snare drum and see what we can do here. I recorded myself playing at quiet volume with no rim shot, medium to quiet volume using a rim shot, loud with no rim shot, loud with a rim shot, and then kind of a medium level with a more dead drum. So we're going to experiment with getting attack out of the drum at these different volumes, seeing how they sound, experimenting with the ring, the after kind of post transient of the drum, and see what we can do with compression with this. And there's a lot of interesting things we can do here. So specifically, I'm going to use a plugin. I'm going to use a distressor plugin. Of course, any plugin or style of compression more or less does the same thing, but they all have different characters. I happen to like distressors. They do what I want. So let's dive in here and see what we can do here. Okay, so for reference, we're going to call 0 a fast attack because it's grabbing the transient right away, and 0 would be a slow release. Sometimes these terminologies on these get very confusing to me, but I think the way they're used makes when we get into it, it'll make sense. So we're going to start with a very slow attack because we don't want to do anything to this quiet hit with no rim shot. And let's just hear how it sounds with no compression. So, sounds like we're playing it quietly, which is great for certain circumstances. It's a nice tone. So let's just start with the 2-to-1 ratio, and let's really crank the input here, which means we're hitting the compressor fairly hard. And what we're going to do is have a slow attack, so we're not touching the transient really, in a fast release, where we're letting the drum ring as long as we can. So this will be very extreme because our input is really high here. Okay, so obviously there's more volume. We're hearing more character out of the drum. It's bringing some of the ring out, some of that tonality out. And so let's start to experiment. Let's do some ratio experimenting here. And with each hit, I'm going to bring up the ratio so we hear how the ratio is kind of flattening the transient. Okay? Since we heard 2-to-1, I'll start at 3-to-1. Here we go. So we can hear how the transient seems to be not as poppy the higher we get in the ratio, because it's kind of smashing everything as we go. Okay, let's go back to 3-to-1. It's kind of a great normal setting here. I'm going to bring input down to where, let's say 8. So it's still pretty hard. We're hitting it pretty hard. And let's start messing with the attack and see how this, what this does. We're gonna hear how the faster the attack gets, the less transient we're gonna have at the front. Okay, so we can hear less transient now now we have a slow attack, and let's move up the ratio scale again and hear that. Okay, so you can hear how we're having less transient, and how the we still have the length on the drum, and our volume is going down because we're squashing it. The attack and the ring are becoming more of the same volume as they get squashed like this. Okay. Let's go back to a slow attack here, so we get all the transient, and we'll move the release faster, and we will hear how this actually can really affect the ring. And sometimes, if you feel like you have too much ring on the drum, this can change that. Okay, so that's just at 3-1. We can hear at the end how the transient is being attacked, and there's the ring is being cut off some. So now let's keep the release here, and we'll move up the scale of ratio here. Okay, so pretty extreme. Doesn't sound great, but what we're doing is we're flattening the drum. The ring seems to be a little less, and obviously now we have the output, which most things have, and that's just gonna, like, if you're squashing something this hard, your output is gonna allow you to bring the gain back up into your, to get your overall drum mix back together, if that's the sound that you're going for. Okay, so let me mess around a little, and because I'm playing the drum quietly, it's always an interesting experiment here. So what we're gonna do, you hear how quietly, and see how quietly I'm playing it. Let's see how big we can make this sound just with compression. I'm just gonna mess around with settings and see how kind of like extreme I can get this. I'm going to bring the output up already, so that's kind of not really affecting us. Now let's see how like fat we can, and like not fat as in low end, but as in like aggressive with the snare sound. Alright, so let's turn the compressor off, and let's see how the difference in this with where I have it set with that on and off. Okay, so to me, it goes from this kind of mellow, I don't want to say transparent sound, because that sound is, maybe working for, the quiet sound may work for a specific song. But if we wanted a little more rockin' sound and we didn't hit the drum hard, we have this right here. Okay, with these types of settings. A slow attack, kind of fast release, and if we get up into this really high ratio, let's see also. So what's always interesting to me is, I think a lot of people, or this is the way I used to think. I used to think the higher the ratio, the more extreme things are going to be, and the more I started to understand compression is, it's not the low compression, low ratio setting actually is not squashing it as much, so we're getting more punch, and the higher ratio can really take out a lot of the punch that you may be looking for. Okay, so let's move to this rim shot sound. And we'll kind of start over here. I'm going to move the input back, and I'm going to move the output back, And so now that we kind of explained all those things, I'm just going to start to mess around. I'll give it to you without the compression, then I'll start to mess around with the settings so you hear with the rim shot. Kind of a medium hit with the rim shot. Pretty decent sound there. All right, so I'll just start messing around. I'll go from here on the input, and we'll start at 2 to 1, and we'll go from here. And I'm gonna go from minimal to really aggressive, okay? And show you some of this release time where we can mess with the decay of the drum, because it's a fairly ringy drum at this point. All right, so you can see going through these things, we're, in some ways we're bringing more character out of the drum. You notice that when you mess with the ratio and the release, it really can add this ring and bringing out the character of the ring in the drum, how the body is ringing and how you hear the snares. And as you shorten the release, it's drying that up, so it's not hanging on to the ring as long, and also with higher ratio that really starts to affect it. So let me do that real quick. Gonna make the release quick, and then put the ratio higher, and we'll hear a pretty big difference in the snare sound here. All right, it gets to sound very affected. Let me do one more thing in here and mess with the attack. I'm going to go back to a lower ratio here, 4 to 1. I'm going to get some release time on this, and we'll mess with the attack again, and you'll hear how the transient changes. can also hear how the stronger we make the input, the more it's grabbing the drum and really compressing it, really like holding onto it tightly. So there's a lot of finesse in these things where the input drives into the attack and release, and then of course your output with the volume. Okay, let's move on to hitting the drum in the center a little harder, and let's work through some sounds with this. I'll start at 2 to 1, and we'll go from there. Actually, here's the sound by itself, no compression. Okay, I'll mess with the input first, and we'll get it to a place that we like it, and then we'll mess with the attack and release. Okay, so if you really want that honky, ringy snare, this is the way to go. You can also see why a lot of engineers, especially these days, they don't want a ringy snare. You know, I think, you know, it may be changing now, but it used to be that drummers, when I was growing up, they always wanted a ringy snare. You know, it was like maybe a Red Hot Chili Peppers thing. It was kind of a popular sound, the piccolo thing. But you can really see how when there is ring on the snare as opposed to being dead, how that comes out. And if an engineer is wanting to get some punch to your drum, how that accentuates the ring, and that, you know, how the whole thing is moving together, and how that's basically impossible to get out. You can EQ it some, you can definitely change the tonality of that, but to get that really fat, dry sound is not going to happen unless you deaden the drum at the source. All right, let's see if we can get this pretty aggressive, even without the rim shot here, okay? Okay, you start to see how this is all working. Of course, with the rim shot, we do have a more immediate high end at the beginning of the sound, whereas without the rim shot, it's a little more rounded sound. We still can get a lot of punch, but it's, you know, sonically, as far as high end and some attack, it's not the same. Okay, so last, let's move on to this, the drum hit without a rim shot, but this is now dead. Okay, the drum is pretty dead, and here it is with no compression. Okay, let's turn the compression on. Again, we'll start with input. We're going to keep the attack really slow so we're not grabbing it. Let's keep the release fast so we're not holding on to it all, and fairly low ratio, and go from there. So you can see how we're getting a nice, really dry sound. We're hanging on to the release here, which is helping us dry the drum up even more. Let's move this ratio up a little and see where we can go with this current sound. Pretty cool. I really dig that sound. So all right, I'm gonna back off of it and see if we can get a fairly different sound, just with this setting, with this sound coming out of the drum. So you can see now when we have a very quick attack, we're losing that transient and we're getting a lot more of the snare sound. So we're getting this really kind of fatty, splatty sound, which is kind of popular. It's kind of in that Tame Impala thing. It's not quite the same, but a lot of these kind of like fat, super wide snares that you hear are this. It's like a very low tuned drum, and they're taking that initial transient off, and just messing with it. Now we have a really high ratio, which I like at this point, in a quick release. Let's bring the release up on this, and see where we go. Okay, pretty cool, right? You can hear how when we just messed with the release, we got rid of that splat and we got back to that really staccato sound there. So, yeah. So here's some examples of what we can do with compression just on the snare. Not only having a quiet volume, playing it at a quiet volume, but playing it at a louder volume with and without rim shots, and a ringy drum and a dry drum. This is a great way to experiment with your sounds. It really helps you understand how your source is affecting the drums. The overall picture of everything. Because just with the ringy drum, you hear how much. This is one mic we're talking about right here. So much of your sound, overall drum sound, can be affected by this one thing, and how you treat it or don't treat it, or how you tune it, or how you hit it. So a lot of information just in this one drum, one microphone, and how it can be affected with one effect also. Okay, compression, fun. We're gonna get more into this with different drums and the overall kit. Talk soon.